Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. I am Dane, your host. I hope that you're doing great wherever you may find yourselves, and blessings to all of you wonderful people out there. Today's video is a reaction and a rebuttal to Rick Beato's most recent video, or near most recent video, where he asked the question, is metal dead? So let's go ahead and get started. Total rebuttal. So I'm telling you right off the bat that I disagree with him 100%. So let's finally get started. He points out, and here's where he's correct, that there is a drop-off in metal with respect to streaming, listening to metal on streaming services. Especially, I think he's pointing out Spotify. Another way of saying that, there's a drop-off in listening to metal on Spotify is that metal is not nearly as popular as it once was. So, right off the bat, flaw in logic. Just because there's a drop-off in any art doesn't mean it's dead. Just because something's not as popular as it used to be doesn't mean it's dead. That is, again, flawed logic. Another way of looking at this is that metal, beg your pardon, another way of looking at this is that metal has been marginalized in a similar vein way back when rock music marginalized jazz. Does that make jazz dead? No, of course not. So here in New Orleans, we have every year in the spring Jazz Fest, and it's, even though it's called the Jazz and Heritage Festival, it's really the Rock and Roll / Jazz and Heritage Festival, because even here, in the birthplace of jazz has been marginalized at this festival by having rock and roll artists and bands perform on the main stage, and then the jazz stuff and the gospel stuff and the rhythm and blues stuff is on the smaller stages. And of course, I have problems with that. Another thing, there's a lot of metal, a lot of metal underground. Just because something is underground doesn't mean it's dead. And it's very similar, if not the same, as marginalized. So again, let me just quick review, if you will. Just because there's a drop-off from a sales perspective, I'll get to that. I mean, a very specific sales perspective, doesn't mean metal is dead. Just because it's not as popular or big as it used to be doesn't mean it's dead. Just because it's marginalized or run underground doesn't mean it's dead. And it's not totally underground either. A lot of new stuff is. Here's the biggest flaw in Rick's argument. He only uses 2 points of evidence. There are a ton of variables to support and not support his argument. He uses only 2 examples. Let me restart over. There's only 2 examples he uses when there are a ton of variables to look at when it comes to having evidence whether or not metal is dead. So, he uses the argument based on streaming, and he uses the argument, which I'll talk more about later, that not enough kids are picking up an instrument. But I'll get to that second. But let's talk about streaming first. Again, there's too many variables that he's not reflecting upon and using or citing, and therefore you're going to have a flawed argument if you're not looking at whether or not metal is dead. Leaving out, so that makes it a biased argument. Whether it's biased on purpose or not, I have no idea. But he didn't think things through. I'll get to that later in the video. Now, because he focuses on Spotify and comparing current, more recent metal bands with respect to how they are doing on Spotify and streaming compared to legendary bands, okay, you're forgetting a lot of you're missing out and forgetting or deliberately leaving out a lot of variables. Let's talk about some of those. What about, so there's more to it than streaming. There's more to it than this. What about people who own the material already on some form of media? A lot of people still love physical media, folks, myself included. What about the CDs? What about the vinyl? Vinyl has been in this amazing resurgence the last 10 plus years. People are buying vinyl in droves still, including the metal community. Just recently, the YouTube channel Classic Album Review, Barry does a wonderful job over there across the pond in dealing with so many avenues of rock music, including metal. And he just recently, one of his most recent videos, he talks and presents the new re-release of Iron Maiden's Live After Death in colored vinyl. Vinyl A and B side is this wonderful baby or powder blue, and then the C and D vinyl record pressing sides 3 and 4 is this wonderful cosmic yellow to go with the shtick, if you will, the album art of Eddie in the graveyard popping out of the grave, and the whole Lovecraft quote on the tomb. It's wonderful. So yeah, that's just one example. I have more to say. So in addition to CDs and vinyl, you also have people who own other media for their music, MP3s, cassettes, even reel-to-reel is trying to make a comeback, because I just saw recently, within the last few weeks, Rhino has released a Yes album, the Yes album, and something else on reel-to-reel. So who knows, who's to say metal won't make a comeback? So it's possible. But my whole overall point to demonstrate that Rick is misinforming people, whether deliberately or not, is very simple. What I'm trying to say is very simple, is you have lots of different media. Again, whether cassettes, reel-to-reel, vinyl, CDs and vinyl especially. Okay, and then, of course, MP3s, a lot of people still deal with that, whether lossless or what have you, some form of MP3. So people are still buying. Not too long ago, you had the Wasp box set that people ate up. You had, and I just got it recently, I did a video on it, you had the, you have the Motorhead No Sleep Till Hammersmith box set. And then before that, you had the Motorhead box set that was called, let's see, The Lost Tapes, which is 6 to 8 live recordings, 6 to 8 different live shows, mostly 2 CD sets for each of those live recordings. So in between, I don't know, 12 to 14 or 16 discs, something like that. Don't quote me on that. So just another example of how metal is alive and well. Judas Priest, their album not too long ago, and then doing a redux or remastering or both of Rock-a-Rolla, which people ate up in droves. You have Bruce Dickinson's solo album that came out not that long ago, around the same time as Judas Priest, give or take. Just a ton of stuff, really. You had KK Downing's band, KK's Priest, in the last few years put out 2 albums. I'm sure there's more to come with that. So yeah, here's a great example. Okay, here's a wonderful example. You have a new subgenre in metal called, not the new wave of British heavy metal, but the new wave of traditional heavy metal. I've listened to some of it. The stuff I've listened to, not much of it. Not a big fan. I'm gonna dive into more of it. The channel Sea of Tranquility does a great job of occasionally pointing out what's new in the new wave of traditional heavy metal. There are other channels. There's another one that it's got 666 in the title, where they play new music, showcase that, because they have the copyright allowance to present new albums, and they post the songs and the track listing for each of those new albums. They do other things besides metal. Some of it's acid rock and psychedelic rock, but yeah, metal is not going anywhere. You have bands that are a throwback to previous legendary bands, like Asmvel was kind of like a new take on Motorhead, Attic a new take on King Diamond, and Merciful Fate. So that influence is still very ripe, if you will. So just another example. Here is another example. You have, in addition to what I've said, the media, okay, you have the box sets, you have concerts. You have people going to concerts, folks. Alice Cooper, some of his stuff is metal, not all of it, but he just played recently in Biloxi. You had Judas Priest here last year or 6 months ago playing Biloxi, which is in Mississippi, an hour and a half, if less, drive from here in New Orleans, give or take. You had, let's see, trying to think, not that long ago, you had King Diamond play out in Arizona, in area, and he toured, or was it Merciful Fate, one of the two. You have bands like Uncle Acid still going strong. You have High on Fire release an album not too long ago. So yeah, it's not going anywhere, folks. So people are going to heavy metal concerts, whether legendary bands like Metallica, Megadeth's going to put out a new album, they're going to be done. But Iron Maiden, I just mentioned him. Iron Maiden has been touring their butts off and on for like the last 10 years straight, it seems, right? Bruce Dickinson doing things with his own band and his own solo stuff. There's a ton of stuff out there. So this notion that metal is dead is just ridiculous. I have more examples, but yeah, the concerts are just huge. So another, let's talk about books. The great rock critic Martin Popoff has put out a book not that long ago on Iron Maiden, and it's called the Iron Maiden Bible or something like that. It's very dense. I haven't looked at it in its entirety. I saw some things online. I don't own it, but it's mostly literature, and there are photos and pictures of things to go with it. Of course, you want that. The fan's going to want both. And then there's another Iron Maiden book by a different author, I forget who, and it's the opposite. Martin's is mostly literature with accompanying photos and pictures, but the other book is the opposite. It's mostly photos and pictures of the band and the instruments and tour stuff and that kind of thing. And then there's some reading material, but the bulk of it is photos and pictures and that kind of thing. Nostalgic. Now, while music matters the most, there's other examples. Of course, it's going to matter the most. That's the most important evidence to support metal is still alive and strong. But you have other things besides music, as I said, books, but you have other merchandise like t-shirts and posters. T-shirts, of course, is in many ways after the music, the Mac Daddy of them all. So many YouTubers have music channel wearing their merchandise, right? Regardless of what band it is, some of it metal, some of it not. But I have a lot of heavy metal t-shirts. I don't wear them much when I record for whatever reason, but from time to time. But there's a ton of websites, TeePublic, Redbubble, Old Glory. Some of them are eluding me now, but there's just a wealth of places to go, the official websites for various metal bands, that kind of thing. You have to be careful. Some of them are fraudulent, but so people are supporting metal by way of merchandise, and that's keeping metal alive in another sense. In addition, of course, again, the music is the most important. Now, if we go back to Rick's argument when he presents and compares and contrasts the millions that current metal bands are making compared to legendary bands, on one hand, Linkin Park and this band and that band has this million, and then the legendary bands are higher, that kind of thing. One of the problems with that is some of the bands that he mentions I don't think are metal. They're a rap, hip-hop, metal hybrid. To me, that's not metal. That should be its own category. But again, only my opinion. He mentions Linkin Park and Limp Bizkit. Linkin Park is closer to metal than Limp Bizkit. Limp Bizkit to me is more rap and hip-hop than it is metal because of Fred Durst's presence and the backwards hat and the look. But the music mostly, to me, sounds rap more than it is those rhyme couplets and what have you. Than metal, you have occasional flourishes of some cool riffs, but you don't have guitar solos much in any of that music, not much. For me personally, if you're going to talk about a new metal band that's actually metal, the closest would be Slipknot, if not downright metal. To me, they're metal, is what I'm saying. So that's a fly in Rick's argument. Another fly in Rick's argument is when he talks about not just bands overall with respect to sales on Spotify or listens on Spotify. He talks about individual songs listening in the millions on Spotify, and he mentions Metallica's Nothing Else Matters. Nothing Else Matters. Well, Metallica is a metal band for the most part. Not Not so much now, they're more hard rock and roll, but we still lump them as thrash metal, give or take. But nothing else matters. So they're a metal band, if you will, but Nothing Else Matters is a rock ballad. It is not it's a rock song. It's not soft rock, but it's got some pop elements. It's not heavy metal. It's a slower type song, not thrash metal whatsoever. So use a better Metallica song as an example if you want to drive your point home. And so I think he fails miserably in bringing up a heavy metal band and not talking about a heavy metal song that they do. So that's ridiculous to me as well. Let's see. Here's another fly in Rick's argument. He talks about a engineer/producer, I forget the person's name, and he quotes this person, give or take, saying that the argument is that metal fades, but then it'll come back around again in full force or something like that. Things come in cycles, or the pendulum swings one way, then swings back another way. Same difference, really. So that he constructs his own argument that metal is dead if it's going to swing around and flourish. It's not going away, but it's going to swing around in the sense that it's going to, be up front and center is the argument. So that's another fly in Rick's argument. So let's recap a couple things. Number one, in case you're late to the video, Rick's argument is flawed because just because there's a drop-off or it's not nearly as big doesn't mean that metal is dead. If it's marginalized, it's not dead. If it's underground, it's not dead. Again, not all of the metal that we have is underground. It's quite, in circulation. People are talking, word of mouth, that kind of thing. You have YouTube, thank goodness, and other platforms that still waving the flag of metal and heavy metal, and you name it. There are books, there are other merchandise besides the music in the books. There is t-shirts and posters and you name it. You have concerts. People are still going to metal concerts. You have the box sets. You have the re-releases, redux, remastering of lots of metal. This is not a heavy metal band, but they're proto-metal, really, excuse me for shaking the camera, but just to serve kind of as an example. Kiss put out on their website, you can get it now, it's expensive though, vinyl and CD versions of the Kiss Alive box set and the Dress to Kill box set. You had Deep Purple recently, but as I said, Motorhead and Iron Maiden, they've put out some new things, or relatively new things, not new in the sense that it's new releases, but not necessarily new material, or it's a combination of both, like you have demos and never before released tracks, that kind of thing, live material that's not seen the light of day until recently, so that kind of thing. So the box set, the reissues is keeping metal alive, as are people going to shows. You have Hellfest every year, and all these festivals in Scandinavia. I can't remember the name of all these festivals, but Hellfest is a huge one here. I think it's in Texas every year. So yeah, this is just crazy to say that metal is dead. And so finally, or near finally, at the end of the video, he brings a friend along to help him in his argument. The second evidence that he uses in his argument to say that metal is dead, or to suggest that metal is dead, is he brings a friend along, as I said, and now the scenery has changed, and they're outside, and there's some buildings behind them, and it's like they're looking over the camera like a football team in a huddle, or a rugby team in a scrum. But his friend says that people aren't picking up instruments, and that's totally not true. I have students at my school who are learning or have learned to play the guitar, or they're getting better at it, and they're playing rock and heavy metal. They've expressed an interest in it. A student I taught last year and the year before that, who's now moved on to a different school, God bless her heart, wonderful student. I wish her all the luck in the world. One of the few students in one of my classes who demonstrated their interest in metal music, because they know I'm a metalhead, English teacher, heavy metal head here, and they were talking about how they saved up their pennies to buy a Venom import of one of the first two albums, I forget which, and it cost them $60 to get it shipped over to Peaches downtown New Orleans, and they went and picked it up. So yeah, a ton, you have a ton of stuff coming out, or whether it's old, new, or blue, that's a joke, but you get my point. Word of mouth is strong, folks, in the metal community. It's not going anywhere. It's here to stay, regardless of how up front and center it is, right? Or if it's pushed to the side a little bit or a lot, it's still, really moving, if you will. So this notion that people aren't picking up instruments is just totally wrong. From my experience and people I've talked to, people are still interested in learning how to play. Oh, what's that? I want to play that. That's a great heavy song. I want to play that. Pick up a bass, pick up a guitar, pick up some drumsticks, keyboards, Moog, buy some used equipment, that kind of thing. So in an overall sense, Rick has just totally missed the mark here. He's behind the 8 ball, or he's not kept up with the times. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Does he even know about the new tradition the new wave of traditional heavy metal? Pick your metaphor. He's got his head in the sand. So let me wrap things up and say, I think what's going on is he's expressing himself in what we call shower thoughts. In other words, he's not thought things through. Because if he had, he would have mentioned the things that I expressed today. So again, he's got these shower thoughts once again. He didn't think things through in a hasty attempt to put out yet another video. And let's talk about the thumbnail of that video. It says, "Is metal dead?" ? And we all know, or most of us know, that not every answer is given to you on a silver platter. It's not handed to you. Sometimes you have to draw your own conclusion from hints or clues that the person speaking or talking or writing gives you. Of course, we call that an inference because the person implied it. They imply something, and then you have to make an inference. And some of the best learning comes through that. But here I think it fails because he asked the question, is metal dead? And he implies it, but he doesn't support it and come to a final overall conclusion. He leaves things hanging. There isn't a closure to his argument. It's one thing to imply something and you get a definitive answer, but he implies it, but he doesn't give a definitive answer. You can give a definitive answer by implying something and not serving it up on a silver platter. So he leaves the question unresolved. He implies it, but he doesn't follow through on an overall, here's what I think. He doesn't answer the question fully, in my opinion. I may have missed something. I don't think that I have because I've watched it 3 times. It's not a very long video. So again, shower thoughts from Rick. He doesn't think things through, perhaps suggesting this is a clickbait video, yet another video for video's sake. Make of that what you will. So when you pose a question, I think it's imperative that you give your answer. And again, he implies something, but the implication isn't fulfilled, if that makes sense. So anyway, these are my thoughts. Tell me what you think. Do you think metal is dead? Or do you think it's alive and well or alive and kicking like I do? Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye now.